Hi, welcome back to Latinas Leaders Rising, El Poder de la Mujer, the power of Latinas today. And we are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month by talking to 17 outstanding Latina leaders. You're going to learn so much. And this is our opportunity to come together as a community and really enhance our power. Today, I am so happy to talk to someone that I admire, that I've known for many years, the Honorable Ana Escobedo Cabral. Ana, so good to see you and thank you for coming. I want to tell you a little bit about her. I met Ana when she was president of the Hispanic Association for Corporate Responsibility, which is our organization to help Latinos move up in corporate America. She did a beautiful job with that and then went on to the Smithsonian Institute, where many of you know we're trying to get a Hispanic museum going. So Ana served there and also served at the International Bank. Is that how you say it, Ana? The International Development Bank?
Inter-American Development Bank.
Inter-American Development Bank, which went across our hemisphere. So she has an incredible amount of experience. Today, she's serving on some corporate boards and doing community work and working on a foundation board. And she has so much knowledge and love of community and people and a wonderful family. She's just a role model for all of us across the country. And we're so happy to have her here with us today. But I do want to tell you, although I don't want to be spoiler alert, that she was the treasurer of the United States. So you might see her name on a dollar bill. She was the 42nd treasurer of the United States. So she actually has held the highest office of any Latina under President Bush. So welcome, Ana. We're so happy to have you.
It's great to be with you always, Juana. Thank you so much.
Well, all the way from California. You know, Ana, I know about your life story and how inspiring it is, especially for young Latinas, who we have a lot of young Latinas with us today. Tell us a little bit about how you grew up and also how that inspired you to do what you're doing today.
Sure, absolutely. So not too different from the story of a lot of other people. I grew up in a pretty poor family, Mexican American. There were several generations that worked in the fields because that was the only work they could get because they didn't have a lot of education. I think my great-grandparents worked in the fields, my grandparents worked in the fields, my parents worked in the fields, and our generation worked in the fields for a bit of time. I have cousins who still work in the fields. So my parents tried really hard to get out of the migrant stream and find other kinds of work, but because they didn't have much education, they had to take whatever was available. And a lot of it was hard labor. So as a result, they ended up sustaining, especially my father, several physical injuries. And we moved a lot. I think I moved elementary school 20 times plus, and I went to 3 different junior highs. I went to 1 high school. So it was a family that exuded a lot of love and warmth and culture and tradition. We grew up very close family to all our cousins, nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, but there wasn't a lot of role models with regard to education. So my parents dreamed I would finish high school because they had not. They had both dropped out, and I was the oldest of 5. And it turned out that when I was ready to graduate, we were barely scraping by, and I was looking forward to a job, maybe a McDonald's, because that would make sure that we had a little more meat on the table because we had mostly beans and potatoes. And a high school math teacher called me into his office when he heard I was going to graduate early to go get work. And he convinced me to apply to the University of California, something I had never imagined. And he promised he would come and see my father and convince him to let his 16-year-old daughter do that. So he did exactly that. He came by, promised that he would get some scholarship dollars if my dad let me go to college. And my dad agreed, and off I went. And it was the thing that changed my life completely, right? Because in the end, I was able to get a solid education, become aware of all of the opportunities that exist in the world that I had never imagined, and was able to send my money home from my scholarships to make sure that my parents still were getting about as much money as I was making after school and on weekends to help support the family. And the doors that it opened changed my life, but changed also the lives of everyone I met after that. Clearly my children, my grandchildren, but lots of young Latinos who I had the chance to interact with, whether they were related to me or not, have heard about the importance of education.
Yeah, education's the key, but I also want to pay homage to your teacher who saw your potential. There's always those angels in our pathway, people that say things to us or help us. And you probably didn't even realize at that time how it would change the trajectory of your life. And you ended up going to Harvard and getting your doctorate degree in law. And just think about all the doors that were open because this one person took a personal interest in you and saw your potential, which I think is something all of us as leaders have to do continuously, is find that potential in people. Were you scared?
Absolutely. For going to college, absolutely.
Yes.
You know, his name was Philip Lamb. He was a wonderful human being, and we stayed close until he passed. And he passed about 10 years ago. But yeah, he picked my college campus, and he picked a campus that was far enough away from my parents that when I ran into trouble, because you get lonely and you're
Oh,
scared,
yeah.
you don't know what
I
to do.
remember.
I picked up the phone and I called my dad and I was like, oh, crying on the phone. And he said, Mija, just come home, just come home. And that's when I realized the stroke of brilliance that Mr. Lamb had, because it wasn't easy to go home from there. And I said, no, Dad, I think I can figure this out. And so I ended up really enjoying my time at the university. Yes, it was very frightening. And I learned a lot from that because there are a whole lot of other things that were new and exciting, but scary. But I learned a lot about how to succeed from my parents, because what I saw in them is they were always, no matter what it was, if it paid money, they'd learn how to do it. It didn't matter that they didn't know how. They would always sort of go the extra mile. And it was about hard work. And that's really the essence for me to success. You work harder, you prove you can do it, people notice, and then good things come of that. So that,
Yeah, you can't really compete with the Hispanic work ethic, can you?
absolutely
And
not.
especially, even half our people today are working class. And so the working class is the backbone of our economy. They cook our food, they do our construction, they take care of our kids, they clean. And so I think, that is part of the Latino or Latina advantage, is that we not only work hard, but we're also very resourceful, and resilient. Look at the resiliency that you learned from your family and from what they were able to do. So that's just such a beautiful story. So I know that you met your husband while you were in college, an extra bonus. Tell us a little bit about that, because that set you on another trajectory to go to Washington, D.C.
It did indeed. Well, I met my husband when I was a sophomore in college. I invited a couple speakers. I was the president of MECHA. And
See, tell people what MECHA is, because we have people that don't have a clue.
It was a student organization that really created leadership opportunities and tried to bring the Latino agenda. Then it was Chicano, because I'm from California,
Right.
to the attention of a lot of other people. And it was a student movement, basically, that supported greater responsiveness to Latinos or to Chicanos in California. And so I had organized an event where we were talking about the lack of diversity and the lack of inclusion of Latinos in the University of California system. And I brought a speaker, and my husband accompanied the speaker because it was his best friend. My husband was in law school at the time. And we started dating immediately. And before I knew it, I was transferring to Davis where he was in school. And I ended up, we get married, and I start having babies, and I drop out of college, and I have 4 children in total before I get that college degree. But at the end of that, he encouraged me to apply, because I'd always wanted to go to law school. I applied to law school and Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and I got into both. And so I ended up choosing to do a joint degree program. He sold his law practice, because at that point he had a nicely established law practice in Sacramento. And we went to Harvard with 4 kids in tow. They were ages 3, 4, 5, and 8.
This is a resiliency story. Ladies, think about
crazy.
this.
Yeah, it was crazy. I didn't have babysitting money. So my youngest in particular, the 3-year-old, went to classes with me, and he would
He's a
often
Harvard graduate, kind of.
exactly. It was great for him. He would often ask questions at the end when the professor would say, does anybody have a question? And I would put his hand down and he would insist. And he's a pretty bright boy, as you can imagine, as are his sisters. But it was a great exposure for my kids. they learned a lot just as much as we did. And after that, we had $100,000 in student debt, big topic these days.
Wait a minute. Yes, that's right on people's plates right now. How do we do this? What do we do?
Yeah. Well, we borrowed the money and we had to figure out a way to pay it back. So he got a job offer in Washington, D.C. And we said, okay, let's go to DC for a couple of years, learn a little bit about how that works, and then go back home to California. But we ended up staying for 30 plus years in DC because once you get in there, I mean, there's so many things happening and you get to touch so many amazing processes, like, changing legislation so it includes Latino views or needs or perspectives, or he went into corporate America after the government, and he was able to sort of reach out through that avenue. And I was doing some of the nonprofit work in public service. And for us, it was a wonderful way to be able to keep giving back to our community.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I want to save this little tidbit for now. You, when you were in Washington, got a job with the Senate. Very few of us have had the opportunity. I think you worked with 25 senators, correct?
That is correct.
Tell us a little bit about what that's like, because we know that the senators have the power. There's 100 of them. And were they all male, or did you have any females?
I think at the end we had a couple of females. They were very powerful. The balance is still not there in the Senate, but yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, the senators have a great deal of power, and you as a staff member to them actually have a lot of power too. And I worked for a phenomenal senator, Orrin Hatch. He was from Utah. He was a Republican. He was Mormon. He was so different from me, but he hired me to work with the Latino community at first. And then he saw my capabilities and asked me then to help run the Senate Judiciary Committee. So I did two jobs at the same time, which was okay, because we talked about work ethic, and I got one to support the other, and it made me much more successful at both. But it was an amazing opportunity. I got to really influence a lot of different pieces of legislation, and I was grateful for that opportunity. I think it's been my favorite job of all the jobs I've ever had. I worked for him for almost a decade. However, when you work for a senator, you pretty much are committed to them for life. So he and I remained very close until he died just about 3 years ago.
Well, I think I'll just put this in because I knew Senator Hatch, because he was a great promoter of women's issues.
Not just women, Latinos, all
yes,
of
of course.
children.
Yes.
And he was also, more importantly, I think, he was able to reach across the aisle. He did a lot,
which is what we need today. What we need
today. He was an amazing statesman. He would reach out to Kennedy when there was, a need for something, and they could both come together and bring both sides of the aisle together on an important issue and get legislation done. And that doesn't happen anymore. We really need to take that lesson to heart.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that the reason I met him was that he had, with Senator Kennedy, had passed the Displaced Homemaker Act, which was money for women who had gotten divorced and didn't really have a career and needed to get retrained. And I was running Mi Casa Women's Center at the time. So we actually got funding through some of those initiatives. And I think that's so important, especially for young people, to remember that our country wasn't always in this gridlock, and that we all have to aspire to bring ourselves back to have that civil engagement that we've had in the past. There's probably some young women thinking right now, wow, I would love to work in the Senate or have some of your experiences. I know we've talked about hard work. We've talked about resiliency, also a lot of adaptability. I mean, here you are, California, Harvard, the children, the Senate. What are some tips that you would say to these young women? Well, here are some ways that you can kind of prepare yourself for, for working in these kind of environments.
Well, I mean, so I got general pieces of advice, I think, for anyone, but for young women in particular. First and foremost, concentrate on your education, get the skills, and make sure you actually think about it as a lifelong opportunity, because things are changing quickly in the world that we live. So you need to keep acquiring new skills. And that may mean formal education or informal education, but the bottom line is you never stop learning, and you never should stop. Period. You should always have something on your agenda to master next. And it might be something as simple as going to a community college after you've gotten college degrees to acquire a few more skills, or graduate school, or just put a stack of books next to your bed and plow through them and read
and browse. Right.
The other thing is, I think it's really important that we surround ourselves with people who believe in us. I mean, I always say, marry wisely. whoever you decide you're going to spend your life with is probably the most important decision you're going to ever make. And you really need to make sure it's somebody who believes in you and somebody who's willing to work with you, because it's not a one person deal, right? It's two people working together. And that's a tough challenge, but I think as long as you're always working towards the same goals, you're going to be able to do that. I mean, my husband saved me many times over, and I did the same for him. So that's important. But
Well, you know, I do want to say something, because some of the younger generation are not so focused on getting married, but they do have partnerships. And I think that extends to partnerships. If you're going to have people in your life, particularly in the Latino community where our relationships are lifelong, you and I have known each other almost 30 years, I think.
Yep.
It's important that you pick those people wisely, you know, like dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. Who are you depends on who you surround yourself by. And so, so I'm always amazed when I think of you and Victor at what an example you are of going back and forth, supporting each other, changing jobs, being willing to move for each other. And then raising these four amazing kids. So continue. So we have learning, we have picking your partner very carefully and knowing it's someone who's going to invest in you and you can invest in them.
And I think to add to what you were saying a minute ago, yes, picking your partner, but also picking your friends. It's not just about, you know, and it's also about sort of being confident enough to say, look, even someone in your family may not be on your side, right?
Right.
You're just going to have to learn to like shut that out. Pick people who believe in you. So it's your partner, it's your friends, it's your associates, etc. I think that that's incredibly important. The other part of it is, I really do believe faith has a great deal to do with whether we succeed or not. And it can be a traditional institutional source of faith. I'm Catholic, born and raised. But it could also just be faith in the way the universe functions. Doesn't really matter. But knowing that there's a higher power that you can turn to, that you can rely on, that you can seek guidance and peace from is important, because there will be moments when you sort of feel lost and you need to find that strength again. So I think that's incredibly important. Staying focused on a set of goals, knowing what they are, but flexible enough to sort of adjust as opportunities come along is, I think, incredibly important. Just making sure that you're moving in the right direction. And bottom line is, believe in yourself. You know, it is important to have faith in yourself, to be able to, even in the weakest of moments, be able to talk yourself off the ledge. I've done that a few times and say, wait a minute, I can do this. I have everything I need. I learned it from
my favorite is, everything you need, you learn from your parents. Let's say that one again. Everything
I need,
we
I learned from
our
my parents. Yeah.
But I was just going to say, I like to say this too shall pass, which is a very old kind of biblical saying, but it is true. You know, if you can just get your arms around the fact that, yeah, there's some hard challenges right now, but you're going to get through this, have the faith that you can do it. And to remember that, you know, tomorrow is another day.
Yeah.
I sometimes I remember a couple of days I go like, well, it wasn't such a great day, but there's always tomorrow.
Always tomorrow. Always tomorrow. Yep. I totally agree.
But I love that fact about learning from our parents. You know, that's such an important thing for Latinos, because when I was growing up, you know, I didn't know my mother was going to be the greatest servant leader I ever met, but she is.
Yeah.
You know, what she sacrificed to make sure that that I'm here, and what your parents sacrificed to make sure that you're there so that we could have a better life, the very essence of leadership. And so I think it's important for Latinos to not only reflect on their past, but also to see what are these incredible gifts we've been giving, because how did we make it through 500 years of being colonized, being marginalized, being minorities, still being working class, still being underpaid? And it's because of our incredible values and everything that you were taught.
Totally agree with you.
Yeah. So, so here you are, you're back in DC, you're working with all these senators, and you're right in the halls of power, you know. And so how did that change your own perspective about yourself? I mean, did you begin to see yourself, because here you are managing senators?
Yes. Well, at least managing their staff, right? And moving them around to the right places. No, you begin to understand that you do have power and that you can use it to do good. That was probably the biggest lesson. It's, at first you're very nervous. You don't know how the system works. You've got to learn that. You've got to master it. And then you're so different from everyone else. There are very few women on staff. There are almost no Latinos on staff. And you think somehow that that you're so different, it almost makes you freeze. But then you begin to quickly learn that people are people. We all very much share a lot of the same fears, a lot of the same hopes, a lot of the same expectations. And so as soon as you get past like that moment where you say, oh, okay, I can relate to you about, I used to tease a little bit. I used to say I was the president of the Home Depot on Weekends Club because I spent so much time, remodeling my homes. But there were a lot of people remodeling their homes at that time. And so even a conversation that started around, oh, what'd you do this weekend? I went to Home Depot. Could break barriers down, right? So it's finding ways to do that.
Yeah.
Example, I grew up in California where we were pretty much Mexican Americans. I didn't see anyone from Puerto Rico, Cuba, Nicaragua, El Salvador until I moved east, until I went to Boston and then later to Washington. So my world is always opening up. It's not just about Latino, non-Latino. It's about even within our own community, getting to know the strengths, the history, and appreciating a lot of the nuances and differences between us, but then also finding that common ground. That's what those senators were doing when they were trying to cross the aisle, right? Find common ground around an important good. And so when you're in the Senate, you suddenly realize, I can do that too. I can find the common ground. How do I find a place where we all meet and say, yeah, this is a good piece of legislation because it addresses all of these needs. And people have to learn from one another. But to do that, they first have to trust one another. And you build trust by getting to know people.
That's a really important thing. You build trust by getting to know people. I'm convinced that Latinos are not only the friendliest people on the planet, but we live for people. That's our heart is relationships. So I always, think that Latinos have a special gift to be able to do that weaving, to come together. And then you spoke about different people in your family. Same thing in my family. We have the whole spectrum, not only of different nationalities and colors and people with different degrees and people without degrees. But it's that sense of humanity, that sense of universality, that sense of connecting and respecting people. And that has really served you well. Yeah, so after you left the Senate, you went to
I went to the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility.
Right.
It's where you and I met.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit about that transition, because you went from government to nonprofit, but nonprofits that interface with corporations. The whole purpose of USAID is to advance Latinos in corporate America.
Exactly. So what happened was, while I was in the Senate, I loved the work that I was doing, but I began to realize that I didn't see the end product, right? You work on big national issues, but you don't see the nuts and bolts of it. And a lot of what I began to believe needed to change had to happen at that local level. So I was looking for solutions that might let me sort of grasp the end product. So with USAID, what I had was the chance to build public-private partnerships that really made a difference for our community, so that we're not just talking about corporate America, but we're also talking about the grassroots community-based organizations and the government in finding solutions to the problems we were seeing. And, the USAID was really focused on making the market case for Latinos being better served by being in the C-suite, being among the employee ranks, rising among those ranks, being part of the procurement process and receiving the contracts, being part of the community-based organization network that was being funded by these corporations, really much more commensurate with the way that we were supporting them financially, because we're really
because we're a $3 trillion market now. Absolutely. And Latinos don't leverage their economic power because we're the consumer market that's growing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so USAID was about doing that. And so what I loved about it was in fact bringing corporate America together with community-based organizations and saying, how do we work better together to produce results for our community, and at the same time recognize that market power and leverage it and make a difference. And so it was terrific. Loved it. Did that for a few years. You and I got to know each other. We did a lot of strategic planning.
I think one thing that we did that was pretty interesting was Well, I believe that when we first started, the board was almost all male, maybe one female from the Mexican American National Women's Group. And we were able to, which I think is a really important thing for us to start looking at how we created gender equity way back. And now Latinas are rising. Latinos are so powerful and leading so many organizations. So yeah, you really transformed it to be to have more women in leadership, and our national organizations as well are now being led, many of them by women. So
Agreed.
what drives you with all this? I want to think about, because it's such an ambitious agenda, and so many people have not had the kind of experiences. From there, you went to the Smithsonian Institute, which is such an incredible resource. But what do you think is that common theme? Because you've worked in government, you've worked in nonprofits, you're on corporate boards, you were the U.S. Treasurer. We're going to get to that one. But what is that common theme that really inspires your heart, that passion?
Well, you know what it was, Juana? I really sort of look back at that example we started with, which was Philip Lamb, because I grew up, as I said, I moved a lot, but I grew up in pretty poor neighborhoods. They were all black and brown, and everybody was the same. And there was a consistent sort of just characteristics of those neighborhoods. Everybody was poor.
Right.
Everybody had children as children, following their parents' example. Many of them were on welfare, or they were dying young of drugs or gangs or alcohol. And I remember once Mr. Lamb opened that door for me, I thought for a second, well, what you feel kind of a little like, well, what's special about me? Why am I here? And they're not. Because
Right.
super capable, super
Yeah.
bright, but nobody took that extra minute to say, oh, but you've got so many more opportunities to go out there. And I really do believe that that's really the bottom line for us. We have a community that's talented, as you said, that is resilient, that has at its core a set of values that are incredibly valuable to the larger society. We believe in community, we believe in family, we believe in faith, we believe in hard work, and we are examples of all of those things. Yet, unless somebody takes the time to help us sort of navigate the world a little bit better than we're able to do ourselves, because we lack examples or exposure or experience,
Right.
too many people get left behind. And
Yeah.
all I could think of was, he gave me a gift. I needed to figure out how to repay it. And for me, it's about making sure our community has those opportunities, because it's not just important to them, not important, it's incredibly important to their families, but our society, as you've been saying all along, our society depends on the success of Latinos, because they're such a growing.
78% of the new entries into the labor market, this economy is not going to be able to move without Latinos.
Exactly.
The great civil rights leader Raul Segedi. He used to say, Latinos have family values like everyone else. The difference is we live them. He used to say, we live them. We live community. I saw a study that even Latino small businesses give more benefits to their people than corporations. I mean, we just believe in generosity and sharing. And also there's a certain equality. I feel the same way. I go like, oh, I made it out of the barrio, but what about all the other Anas and Juanas who had the potential? I was lucky because I got a scholarship to a high school that was, an academy. But you have to pick out these little examples where in reality, so many young people, and particularly our young Latinos, are capable of doing wonderful, wonderful things.
So much more. It's surprising to me, Juana. I've come back to California, where I live now, retired, but as you said, sitting on a number of boards.
But busy.
Very busy. And I have the opportunity to meet with a lot of young people, because I end up, like you, being on a speaker circuit. And I am always blown away by the incredibly talented young women who come up to me and say, I'd like to know more about how you did this or that. And when you start to learn their stories, you begin to realize they too are first or second generation, coming from very modest families. Yes, they finally made it to college, but they don't know where to go, how to go, what to do, how to build that success, because they still don't have that as a part of their dinner conversation at home, because their parents haven't done it. And it's incredibly important that we keep helping young people know where to go, how to do it, what makes sense. they are the future. And if we can't invest the time that's needed, well, we're all going to be hurt by that process. They are amazing. And you listen to these young people and you think somehow the world has changed tremendously, but it hasn't for so many young people. This
Mhm.
is the beginning of their adventure, and we got to guide them through it.
Yeah. Well, and our community is very young. We're the youngest people. I always say we're young, we're good looking, we're hardworking. But so this youth involvement becomes more and more important. And this series is going to be intergenerational. We're going from, people like you with very seasoned experience to young people who are, making movies and starting new things. And I totally agree with you. I'm always blown away about how talented they are, and how they think in a multifaceted way, because they've been connected to so many different things, and how they're digital natives and how they have a global perspective and are connected to people across the globe. So yeah, I'm very excited about helping young people find their way, and for them to learn from our stories, even though it's a little bit different for them. The feelings and the challenges are the same. Speaking of challenges, what would you say would be one of your greatest challenges that you've overcome, and so that people can kind of learn that there are these roadblocks along the way. Many of them are our mistakes, are often our teachers. So tell me a little bit about something that really challenged you as you look back.
I think that there are probably many challenges, right? As you say, every time I started a new job, I was convinced I was going to fail because it required a new set of skills. Somehow God put something in front of me and I went through the door with some faith, but I was scared to death, right? So every time you go through that door and you're realizing, I may not have the skills yet today to get this conquered, I went back to that core set of values and said, okay, what do I got to do again? Got to work harder. I got to put my nose to the grindstone. I've got to learn. I've got to invest. That happened so many times. It's incredible. I think the bigger challenges for me, Juana, were, finding the right balance between family and work
Oh,
with four
wow. Yeah.
children,
Yeah.
right? Um,
You have four children. I
yeah,
want everybody to hear that, because I was a single mother as well. And when you look back, you go, how did I do it? But on the other hand, what a rich thing to have these children now that are, my daughters all have advanced degrees. I'm like, how did that happen?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And finding that balance is hard because you're trying again to make a name for yourself. I always thought it was important. I had three daughters and one son, that the daughters see that I could, as a woman, participate in the world and contribute to it and succeed. But that meant working a lot of hours. And so my husband and I found a way to sort of split that, but the balance wasn't always great. And we struggled over that a bit. And sometimes, we were brutally honest with each other and said, hey, we aren't doing a good job here. Let's
Mhm.
go back, take stock, rearrange, figure this out. Our children would remind us, right? Like, hey, you're
Yeah, yeah.
supposed to be here and you're off at work. So there was a lot of
Yeah,
moments.
we all got a lot of static for that.
Exactly. But luckily, I raised my children. So I grew up in a house where you were seen but not heard, right? Old-fashioned rules.
Right.
We did it differently. We told our children they should have opinions and be confident to express them. And sometimes we were sorry we did that, but it was actually really very good because they had a lot of confidence in themselves and they could say, "Hey, take a break here."
Yeah, well, I have a millennial daughter, Paloma, and I always used to joke that when we were growing up, our parents would say jump and we would say how high, and I would say jump and she'd say, well, why? Why do we want to jump? What are you talking about? So and that's so cool, I guess, in some senses, that our children now have, critical skills and problem solving skills and can ask questions and so forth and so on. And I do think, that there is some of that in the Latino community, even though our traditions were that, you respected and followed your parents. But I always had aunties and different people that you could talk to that really would explain things to you and help you get through that hoop. But I do think that work-life balance, and it's very challenging for women, especially when they're in the middle of it, how do I have a career and at the same time have a relationship if you have one, and then raise your children. And so, one thing I used to tell my young leaders is you can have everything, but not all at once. So I think part of it is really pacing yourself. Although our children might disagree, I didn't really take off in my career till I was in my mid 30s or kind of later 30s. And by that time I felt like, that I could do that because my children were getting older. But anyway, so your challenge has been the work-life balance and how you
That's
continue.
one of the challenges, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Also just being, being in very new situations and trying to make sure that you're prepared to take advantage of those. Being the only woman in the room often, raises a lot of challenges. Being the only Latina in the room can often, in and of itself be a challenge. Making sure when people are sort of, expressing some negative or somewhat sexist or racist points of view, that you can challenge those, but in a way that, doesn't undermine your role in that room as well.
Right.
Just all of the above.
Yeah. Well, keeping your cool under fire is a really hard thing. That's actually how John F. Kennedy defined leaders. He said leaders keep their cool under fire. They're cool under fire. That's a really hard thing to do, particularly because Latinos are a bit passionate and emotional about things, but also because our stakes are so high. If you're a person in power, this is what I learned. You're with a group of white males that are in power. The stakes aren't very high for them. I mean, they're still going to go home to their country club or whatever if you're, dealing at that level. But for us, when we're talking about our children or education or raising the employment rates or helping women move up or opening corporate America, those are high stakes. So a lot of times we have to learn how to be cool under fire. And you're one of the coolest people under fire I ever met. Nothing ruffles your feathers.
Well, thanks. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I try really
Well,
hard.
it's good because you've had to deal with a lot of people in power.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I tell people, if I start to smile, then that I'm really anxious, because
Oh, I
generally
love
I'm
it.
very cool. But if I start to smile a lot, I don't know why stress and anxiety shows up that way. It does. It's maybe a gift because
think
you
it's a
didn't have
gift.
any clue, but
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
smiling.
So that's a good tip, everyone. Smile when you're under pressure, and try to keep that composure. They call it executive presence. And I really do believe, though, it's because if you have high stakes a lot of times, or you work so hard to get there, you take it personally, and I just really think that not taking things personally and trying to get through things, which we all don't always do, but having that composure. So you're sitting there, it was at the Smithsonian when you got the call from the Bush White House, correct? I just want you to walk us through that. Here you are, ladies, you're at a job, you're doing the best you can, and you get this phone call. Go ahead, Anna.
Well, yep, you get the phone call, and at first I was, thinking this is not so what you don't know is that during the first 3 years before that, I kept getting calls from the Bush White House saying, would you take this job? Would you take that job? Would you take this job? And every time they did, it wasn't the right job. It wasn't something I could perform well for him, that I would give him an advantage over. And
so that's a good thing. Choose a job that you can do well, that you're passionate about, that you have an investment in. That's a wonderful
to make a difference. Yeah. And so I think they kept calling, and there was a very dear friend who was working in the White House and basically said to me, nobody says no to the president, and you've said no like 4 times. We're going to stop calling. And I said, well, it's really, I owe it to him to do the best job I can, and you need to fit me into the place that makes a difference. So I got that call about the treasurer spot. I actually got it a year earlier, and I just didn't think that was the right fit for me still. So I said no to that. And I instead gave them a list of names, and they started interviewing those people. And a few months later, they called back and said, look, this is really what he wants you to do. And a year later, I thought, well, you know what? It is maybe a good time. And actually, interestingly enough, I had another friend who was also being interviewed at that point in time. And I found out she was also interested, but she was much more qualified than I am in terms of experience. She was older and had some senior positions. And she and I chatted a little bit, and she said, you know what? I think you'd be better at it, and I don't need this. So I'm going to drop out of that.
Oh
because
my gosh, this is a beautiful story.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so I often forget about that part of the story. So then I went forward and I said, okay, this is the right time. So I went through the process. It was very complicated and it was very difficult politically because essentially it was on the eve of the election. They were not letting any Bush nominees through. They were not holding hearings on nominees. They were not, they just had frozen the entire process. But because I had known Senator Hatch, and because my husband had known Senator Hatch, my husband and he drafted a plan to get me a hearing, get me out of committee, get me onto the floor, get me ready for a Senate vote. And they did that because they could, because they had Senator Hatch had the power to do that. He's a pretty senior senator at that point. And so as soon as the election was over, I went through in about 5 seconds. It was, it's just a
Wow.
pretty amazing story. And
But that also talks about your reputation, because by that time you had done so many things, and I think this thing that you said, that you and Senator Hatch would be friends forever, is such an important thing, you know?
yeah,
And that especially for our young leaders, you learn that as a seasoned leader. They always say in politics, you may be on one side, and everything is politics, by the way. You
yeah.
may be on one side one time and then you're on another side. Just don't burn your bridges. And even though you disagree with people, try to keep that sense of relationship and respect, because look what happened. I bet there was nobody else that was able to pull that off.
Well, yeah, nobody else got any hearings. Nobody
Yeah.
got, so they had to start the process. It wasn't that it was impossible, but they had to wait till the election was over, the new uh, swearing in of the president happened, and then a renomination process, because the entire thing closes down. But I did not have to wait for that. I was one of the few that was able to get in at that late point in the year. So as a result, got sworn in December instead of January. I had a formal ceremony in January, but I was sworn in December.
And
And it
what
was
did your parents think?
so
That must have been, oh my God.
yeah. My mother, so my father had passed away a few years before, and it was rather sad that he wasn't able to see that, since his favorite thing that he walked away from Washington, D.C. with when he visited me was a sheet of unsigned uncut dollar notes, right? Like that was his prized possession. But my mother was there and she was super proud, obviously. And so were my kids. I mean, they were
Oh,
proud of
wow.
me as
Yes,
well,
of
right?
course.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so tell the story about when you went to sign your name on the dollar bill and
Oh
how
my
that
God.
works.
Yeah. Well,
Here
yeah,
we are, and you have to sign your name, and it's going to go on all these dollar bills issued under that administration, right?
yep. So what happened was I was invited to come and meet the staff at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, which prints all of our money. And I didn't realize at the time that they were going to ask for my signature. I just thought it was, the first meeting we're going to get
Courtesy
to know one
call.
another. Yeah. So I go in there and sure enough, I meet the staff and we're going through all of that. And they said, oh, by the way, we need your signature so we can start making the money with your name on it. And I said, oh, okay. So I sat down and they handed me a sheet of paper and it had 5 lines on it. And they said, here's a pen, just give us 5 signatures and we'll pick the best one and we'll go forward. And I said, okay. Seemed very easy, but oddly enough, Juana, when I tried to sign, my hand started shaking. I could not settle my hand. And every time I tried to get the pen near the paper, I was like out of control. And I was thinking they're like, they must think I'm an idiot or something because I can't even get my pen to the paper. But I had to get something in my mind kind of focused on it. And so finally I said, wait a minute. If I remember that when I put my name on this piece of paper, I'm actually honoring my parents and my great grandparents and my husband's family, because this signature means that all of their sacrifices mattered and they will forever be a part of history. I immediately was able to put that pen on that paper. And for me, that was like a huge lesson. It's to remember that it's not about you, but it's about all of them and what they did for you and how you pay it back. So that's my story.
Wow, I love that story. Sometimes when I have to do something really hard, sometimes even when I have to give a talk in front of a lot of people, I call on the power of my ancestors. Because for them to get us to where we are today, that was a lot of power, and to honor that, because that they were all pretty simple and humble people that had a vision. I always say they had a vision that someday somebody wouldn't be working in the fields or wouldn't be washing dishes like my mother did. They had that vision and they were willing to sacrifice their lives. So everything I do, everything you do, we are honoring their sacrifice, but also bringing it forward. And especially for young people who are listening, to be able to go back and talk to your grandparents or to find out about them and to look. I always say, if my mother could do what she did, I can do anything. If your mother and father could do what they did, you can do anything,
Absolutely.
because of everything they've overcome. But that I love that story because what you're saying is, I am doing this in honor of those who came after me, and I am doing this so that those that come after me can understand that they can do great things as well. Or,
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Well, when you look back, what's your proudest moment? We talked about a challenge, but what would you say? I mean, I know it's our children because our children, I know your children are all educated and doing good things. But what would you say, like to the young women, especially that are listening, to some Latinas who are in their mid-career? What would you look back on and say, wow, that's my proudest moment?
So I think it bears repeating, but I do think if you ask me what my greatest accomplishment was in my life, I would say to you, I raised four amazing human beings. I did it
Yeah.
alone. I had my parents, I had my in-laws, I had my husband, because it is everybody who has a hand in the raising of those children. But they turned out to be wonderful human beings who are raising their children in the same manner. And it's a commitment to family, and it's larger than just yourself, and it's about using your gifts to give back. So that said, if I say what are the things that I've done that really mattered professionally, there are a couple pieces of legislation that we were able to get through when I was in the Senate that I was really happy with. For example, we worked hard to get the first funding for Hispanic serving institutions. HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities,
Right.
have been funded for decades, but
Seriously, I didn't realize that.
yeah, but Latinos had not. And so I was able to get a number of Republicans to join with Democrats. Remember, this is all about bipartisans,
Yeah.
and say, okay, we're gonna break the stalemate and give HSIs their first funding.
Yeah.
And we were able to get it through. And now it's grown significantly every year
Oh,
since.
yeah. But
Every,
and especially for Latinos that are listening, that are going to Hispanic serving organizations that are able to get services and able to go to special classes and Chicano studies and women's studies and so many things that have been done. But yeah, to have Hispanic serving organizations is such an important piece of legislation. That's a real legacy, by the way.
it is. And what's surprising to me today is that there are more than 500 HSIs today. They have grown all over the country. It takes 25% of your student body has to be Latino, low income, and 500 different universities plus over the entire country have qualified and are now able to draw on some of that money. And that money is used to improve the quality of education for the entire student body, not just Latinos. So for me, this was something that was really important, a small step, but that you build on. The other thing I was able to do was get a charter for the American GI Forum. So we all know about the American GI Forum, maybe the younger generations do not, but that was the Latino military affiliate organization that formed after World War II, when Latinos couldn't get buried in regular cemeteries, and they had to form their own cemeteries, and
They wouldn't let them be buried next to white veterans, even though they died defending our country. I think a lot of young Latinos don't know that.
Yeah, they don't know it.
That they died in World War II and came back, and we were discriminated against even during the burials of.
Absolutely.
And so we fought that and won.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing was, we had created an organization, and one of the advantages of being a federally chartered organization was it makes you qualify for funds and gives you a lot of advantages. But Latinos had not been able to get this organization a federal charter. So working through Senator Hatch, reaching across the aisle, I got a charter for the American GI Forum, which then changed the nature of their work completely. And I was very proud of that. And there were other examples of just pieces of legislation that made a huge difference in those small micro ways. But as I said to you before, as wonderful as those were, I didn't get to see what it was like in the community. So that's kind of what I'm about today. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
let's go
yeah,
back to the
yeah, yeah.
values.
So here you have a Hispanic serving organization that may be benefiting from something you did. By the way, I want to know how old you were then, because a lot of times, when these young people look at me, they can't relate to what I'm doing. But hey, I was in my 30s when I started Mi Casa Women's Center.
32. I
How
was
old were you?
32.
32. You see,
Yep.
ladies,
Yep. That's the
gentlemen,
lucky
everybody.
number.
Yeah, I mean, as we look back, we did these things when we were pretty young, and they can do likewise.
Yep.
But those are really important things, and sometimes we don't think about leadership in that broad perspective. That maybe you're not, one-on-one with people, but you're developing systems and laws and organizations, even like the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, that now really has a large footprint in corporate America. That little by little these things happen. And I think one of the things we can offer is that perspective. So we can say to a 32-year-old, yes, you can. And I can say to somebody in their mid-30s, you can start your own organization. Let's get the people together. So that's wonderful, wonderful news about that. So you're in your 30s when that happened. That's just amazing to me. So when you think about your life now and as we move forward, what do you see for Latinos in the future? I mean, things have changed so much in our lifetime. Uh, how do you envision? I call it the Latino destino, the place that Latinos are today.
I actually see nothing but great things, but I do think we need to remember there are so many Latinos still who need some guidance, direction, a Mr. Lamb moment, right? So we can
Yeah.
all do that. And there's so many of us who've succeeded. Like there are great numbers
Yes.
of people who have power, success, uh, both economically and professionally, that need to give back, need to bring others along, and need to care enough about that. We need to invest more in our own charities and our own organizations that are doing the work to really make sure that young people can make those advances. But I am thrilled with what I see in terms of our advancement. Whether it's the size of and number of our businesses or the number of young people going to college and graduate school.
We're the highest participants now. I mean, the entries, we're the
Absolutely.
highest entries.
Yeah, but we still have a lot of work to do, right? I mean,
Yes.
careers are changing rapidly, skill sets are changing rapidly. We need to stay with it and make sure that our young people understand where those opportunities exist and that they hold on to the values that we are talking about today, right? It's about making sure it's not just about you, it's about your community, it's about the family, it's about giving back, it's about making a difference to those people. And as long as we can hold on to that, society is much better off. I mean, we all are building a better US, a better world, a better, family environment, a better community environment. All of that matters as long as we hold on to those values. And some of those values, I would say Latino values, you can discard. The macho piece of it, you can probably get rid of. There's a few other things, a few other traditions, but there's so much good in it that you
Right.
have to recognize and you want to hang on to and you want to pass on. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm
But
excited
I
about.
actually think our values can transform America, can bring us
I
back
agree
to
with you.
real family values. We're so patriotic, we're so hardworking. But I think more than that, we're so inclusive.
Yeah.
We like the work that you've done has been because you were able to bring people from different communities, different persuasions together. And I think that's kind of a natural Latino thing because our families are so diverse and so different. And also because we value individualism. We value people as individuals. And so our values are so important for us to know, first of all, and then to hold on to, and then to give them as gifts to the society as a whole.
Totally agree with you, Juana.
Yeah, it's so wonderful. Well, Anna, this is Hispanic Heritage Month that we're releasing these wonderful videos. What does Hispanic Heritage mean to you?
For me, it's a recognition, a moment in time, right? Where you say, okay,
Yes,
or a month in time, where
yeah,
you say, oh, let's look at all these contributions. But for me, Latino values, Latino heritage needs to be something we live every single day.
yeah,
So it's important. We get to recognize it, but honestly, we need to live it every single day. As you had quoted Raul saying, we live these values every single day. We need to keep doing that. And we do that by recognizing our history, our contributions, our strength, our potential, and as you say, share those gifts with the rest of the world.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us, Anna. We're going to be doing interviews with Latinas all during Hispanic Heritage Month, and I hope people will tune in. What's a good way for people to get a hold of you if they wanted to get a hold of you?
Easiest way is to actually go to the LinkedIn page, Ana Escobedo Cabral, and you will find me. It's
Okay.
and I love responding to LinkedIn messages. So
Well, and we'll have that information when we release the video and everything. But hey, everyone, think about Anna growing up in a migrant family, helping her family gather scraps of materials when her father was a junker. Think of her entering the University of California by herself as someone who came from a migrant family, traveling across the country, going to Harvard University, then into the halls of Congress, all the way up to being the treasurer of the United States. It's a journey that she has been on, and we're so grateful to have shared that journey with her, but also to learn that we too can strive for greatness and really strive to give back to our people and our community. And at the same time we do that, we grow as leaders, as people, and even as spiritual people. Our spirit and our heart and everything expands. So thank you, Anna, for everything you've done with your life. You're such a wonderful, glowing example for all of us.
Well,
Te quiero.
I love you, Ana, and thank you, because I learned so much from you. So I appreciate this. And this was fun. Thank you.
Okay, adios.
Bye-bye.